I think we start with still people missing, but let's get started. I wanted just to do this, because usually when I do free tours, there are hundreds of thousands of people, but it's people that you only see for the preview. So I wanted to just show you how much I appreciate your support and the fact you actually participate in the paid sessions. And today we're going to explore the presence of the female artists, mostly in two times that were extremely relevant for art. So actually three different places in the Italian Renaissance, of course, and in the Italian Baroque age, where of course the best and the greatest artists were mostly in Italy. And then the 18th century, the most important and the center of European art was definitely France and Paris especially. So we're going to move to France then. And then eventually I got a surprise for the 20th century. I'll tell you beforehand, it's not Frida Kahlo, because whenever it's a female painter, it's always because there's a political aspect and there's also the story of the life. But I won't mention it, but I won't mention another great female artist. And I think, say it again.
Georgia O'Keeffe?
Yes, of course. Yes. Yeah. Okay, I wanted to give the surprise. Okay.
And I was silent.
Yes, Georgia O'Keeffe. Well, I mean, she is really the mother of American modernism. Okay, so this was Haydn, The Creation, which I really like the way the voices are merged. This painting here is by Sofonisba Anguissola. That would be the first painters I'll be talking about. And she was born in Cremona in Lombardy, and she is one of the few female painters that is mentioned by and possibly the only one mentioned by Giorgio Vasari. Vasari wrote the life of the painters, the architects, and the sculptures of starting from Cimabue in the 1200s down to the late 1500s. The last one is Miguel Angelo, and he described the lives and the style, and he comments a lot of artworks from artists, especially of the Florentine Renaissance, 1500. So it's really the fundamental work to understand the Italian Renaissance. Anyway, I really like this. This is not the biography of Sofonisba, because there isn't one for her, but there is this biography of Roberta de Rozzi, which was a female sculptor from Bologna, which is, there were a number of female painters, but sculpture is really, really rare, because of course there's also a physical aspect in that trade, especially back then when it didn't have electrical power tools and everything was done by hand, mostly by hard work. Anyway, but what Vasari says is very important, because he always starts describing with a kind of a moral content or kind of an intro that explains what is he talking about and what's the relevance of this. So he says, it is an extraordinary thing that in all those arts and all those exercises wherein at any time women had found and thought fit to play a part in real earnest, they have always become most excellent and famous in no common way, as one might easily demonstrate by an endless number of examples. And then he goes on making a number of names, and then but in no other age for certain it has been possible to see this better than in our own, so in the 1500s, in the Renaissance, wherein women have won the highest fame not only in the study of letters, as been done by Signora Vittoria del Vasto, Veronica Gambara, and others, and then it starts with a long list of names, and then again Latin and Greek, but also in every other faculty, nor have they been too proud to set themselves with a little hand so tender and so wide as to breast from. And this now is getting a bit patronizing here in the last part. But what he says that it's true that female painters in the Renaissance, they were as good as their even better than their male counterparts. But so if it's so, why in the art history books they are very rarely mentioned, with the exception of Artemisia Gentileschi, many others they are rarely mentioned. And I like to start with Sofonisba. She was, as I said, born in Lombardy, and she inherited that kind of style. Now most of the female artists in the Italian Renaissance were almost every one of them were daughters of painters, and that's how they got their training, and that's how they got their basically career started. Because of course, many trades at that time were like family business or were passed on father to a child, unless they were exceptionally gifted. But if a gifted child was born, the gifted girl was born outside of an artist family, very rarely would have been trained into to become a painter. And it was also a very competitive field, and also there were other reasons that we'll explore, which tend to keep women back for holding women back for centuries. In this case, I really like this painting because Sofonisba is representing itself painting this Madonna with a child, and you could see the palette of the colors. You could see the stick that was used to rest the wrist while painting, to keep the hand still, and she's looking at herself. There is an element, an echo, a distant echo from the school of Leonardo, that kind of mystery element in the expression, the light, and also that kind of suspended atmosphere with the very, very detailed part, especially in the hair, in the eyes. She became one of the most important artists in Lombardy of our time, and you could see the study of the naturalistic elements that was a characteristic of art in Lombardy at that time. In this case, this is a drawing which is kept in the museum in Naples, where the boy he's been bitten by a langustino or something like that, and he's basically showing this expression of pain while the sister is looking at his expression. She's contemplating, right, trying to help. And there is a moral message to this. Of course, it's not just a naturalistic representation, and it's very similar to another masterpiece that would have been made a few decades later by another great Lombard, Caravaggio, Miguel Angelo Merisi Caravaggio. And you could see here this is the boy bitten by a lizard. There are two versions of this one. This one which is in the National Gallery in London, and then there's another one which is in the Longhi Museum in Florence. And Longhi was the art historian that at the beginning of the 20th century discovered Caravaggio, which was long forgotten. And you could see that in both the drawing and also in the painting, the fact that the child here wanted to play but got bitten. And in this case, this young boy, possibly a sort of Bacchus, is enjoying the fruits, the flowers, what beautiful and nice life has to offer, but he's get bitten. There's a moral meaning to it. In enjoying the pleasure of life, there's always their suffering, there's always there the end and sin as a consequence, as there is in generally in life. So these were like conversational pieces, and that drawing was basically a study for one of those paintings probably lost. This is Campi, which was one of the masters. So Sofonisba was first trained at home, and then eventually got a training by this the painter Campi, who actually is portraying her own pupil in his own pupil in this painting. So this is the portrait of Sofonisba as made by his master. At the age of 26, she this is a painting which is the one I use as a cover because I really love this all-female scene. I think it really describes as the kind of intimacy and the kind of style that she had, that she wanted to represent with great detail, naturalistic detail, the figures, but also with a very strong psychological characterization. You have the old woman on the side, something that we will have seen later on also by Caravaggio. Certain elements that Caravaggio made famous because he brought them to perfection. They are already in Milan and the area around Lombardy in the decades before, so it's not something that comes from a single man. It's the result of a school. Also, the background reminds a lot of Leonardo backgrounds with a very long perspective, with this distance fading landscapes. And you can see the girls are playing chess, so which is a highly intellectual game, and at the same time you can see they are perfectly dressed with these jewels, with the hair done. So I think it's a really a nice image of an all-female playing moment. And this is another family portrait where there is Sofonisba first on the left as a teenager with the father. This is by her with the little brother and the dog. And again, another intimate scene. But by the age of 26, she actually...
I'm watching this art thing that is on. Does Mom watch?
Okay. And and she was invited to become the official painter of King Philip II of Habsburg, the King of Spain, which was not just the King of Spain, it was an emperor ruling on a vast empire that went from the Philippines to Mexico and to the lowlands. So basically a vast possession. So she was there for 14 years in Spain, and she got one of the best job a painter could possibly have, because she got then a regular wage, a very high wage. She was working making the portraits of the members of the royal family, and especially of the wife of the emperor, and there are several of these royal paintings. Most of them are in the Prado Museum in Madrid, and this is one of the few that are surely made by Sofonisba. But many of the paintings in that museum, they bear the names of other painters which also were active in that area at that time. But recently, many critics believe that these were actually made by Sofonisba, because she spent there 14 years. She must have had quite a long time. Anyway, when the third wife of the king, Eleonora, died, which we have here, this is a portrait of the queen made by Sofonisba. When she died, and you can see also the perfection of for example, the marble column, the dress, it's really a beautiful painting. Well, when this queen died, King Philip wanted Sofonisba to marry and to find her own life. She was very close to the queen, so he probably was afraid that if she would have married again, then the new queen would have had problems with the former confidant and friend and painters. So in the court, usually the artists of the court, they were most of these royals, they spend most of the time either playing music or having portraits done or doing social activities, where these people were actually part of their entourage. They have very close relationships. So once the queen died, or there was a new king, usually there was a change of all these artists, of all this kind of group of closer members of the court. So she was married to a Sicilian man called Moncada Pignatelli, and she moved to Sicily. But the marriage didn't last long. After a couple of years, the husband died, and she moved to Genoa. In Genoa, she ended up then marrying a sailor, a captain, with which she was really much in love. And after he died as well, she moved then to Sicily. She died in Catania, age 93. So in 1630s, she lived a really long life. But by then, she already quit painting it for at least 10 or 15 years, because she was completely blind by then. Of course, it was quite common that people who lived over the age of 70, they started to have cataract and other problems. And of course, there was no surgery, no remedies at that time. But she was still having a social life. In fact, just a few years before she died, she was visited by the painter Van Dyck, who was really impressed by talking to her and said, I've learned more about painting talking a few hours with this blind painter than studying all my life. And it was really an eye-opening moment for him to meet this painting. Another artist of the there's a mistake here, is 1552 1614, is Lavina Fontana. The father also was a painter. You can see here he held self-portrait in the late Renaissance style, with this bright red dress and the the color palette is similar to the kind of a Venetian style painting. She was actually from Bologna. And here you could see self-portrait of Lavinia playing the spinetta de piano. Now, at that time, girls which were, born in middle classes or high classes, they had a high education. They were receiving an education in letters, in music, especially because music, the discipline of music and the harmony of music was believed to be one of the best kind of training to develop the nature, the balance, the harmony, and the good nature of a young lady. And painting was not of them, unless, of course, they were born as an artist. But many of these painters of the 16th 16th, 17th century, they did play piano, and there are several self-portraits at the piano. And this is a curiosity. It's Antonietta Gonzalez. The Gonzalez families, they were a kind of the equivalent of the freak show of the late Renaissance. So I don't remember which king, but I'm not sure if it's the king of Spain or the king of Naples, was given a 10 years old boy covered in fur. Of course, it's a disease, it's a genetic disease that makes your fur covering, growing all over your face. It's actually a condition, and a genetic condition. So there's not much you could do. At that time, they considered it was just a monstrosity. So this is a little girl who was the daughter of this Gonzalez. I think it was a Mexican, or it was from somewhere Central America, and then came in late 1500s to Europe and traveled across Europe as a kind of a freak show with his children. So Lavina Fontana made a portrait of her with her face covered in fur. There's also the portrait of the boy and the portrait of the father. If you Google Gonzalez airy face, you find there's several of these paintings made in the 1500s. Quite a sad story, really, pretty much like the Barnum freak show and all this kind of really sad story about people with disabilities that were really considered monsters or something to be. The word monster comes from Latin monstrum, which means show, something to be shown, because of course was something to look at anyway. And she didn't do many of these paintings. It was just, I really want to show you because quite peculiar. But she made several portraits of lords and ladies, like in this case, the lady with the dog, in which, of course, the dress, the outfit, and of course the dog and all the other elements were actually a statement of the portrait. And one painter of which we have very little information, and she had a really sad story, it's Maria Robusti, Marietta. She was the daughter of Jacopo Jacopo Robusti, so the great Venetian painter who basically was one of the greatest painters of late 1500s in Venice at the time of Titian and Veronese, one of the three great masters at that time. Of course, he loved very much his daughter. The daughter, at a very young age, probably age 6 or 7, started to work in the workshop of the father. And this is her self-portrait, again with the music and the piano, because there was a canonical way to represent a well-educated woman, somebody that you wanted to marry, because she wasn't just beautiful, she was also clever, because she was, she could play the piano, she was nice. So it was kind of try to sell her. And Marietta had the chance to take the same career as Sofonisba. She was invited to become the official painter of the King of Spain. Tintoretto said, no way, you're going to get married. You marry a nice, wealthy man. That's what every mother wants to for their children. And you're going to have a lot of children and you're going to be happy. Anyway, this did not happen. She married a rich man, indeed, a goldsmith, or a gold merchant in Venice, so it was a very rich man. And then one day, she was 30 or 31, she had a child who was a toddler, and the toddler died through an accident while they were actually on a day out, also with the grandfathers, all the family. They were out in Mestre, like in the area on the mainland from Venice. And Tintoretto was very shocked. Also, Marietta had depression. She never recovered from that. She died age 31 or in her 30s. And in the 19th century, this painting was made showing Tintoretto mourning the daughter and on the deathbed making her portrait of a daughter. Of course, we don't have that portrait, probably never happened, but of course in the romantic time they had this idea of the father being sorry for the loss of the daughter, and of course through using art to kind of express his mourning and his sorrow. And this is one of there are not many artworks that we can identify for sure from Marietta, because Marietta work in the workshop of the father when there were another dozen of painters, and they were all working together on the same painting. So many of the works actually attributed to Tintoretto, they were also had helpers working there, so she could have been working there. This is one of the few, is a portrait of a Venetian noble whose name is up there on the top left, that represents, of course, the abundance being given, a lump sum of money there arriving. You can see this the light and the aerial view of the figure actually flying in down. It's similar to some of those flying figures like that you could see many, several, episodes of miracles, especially that were painted, like miracles of St. Mark's, especially where you have these figures flying in from above in the Tintoretto way. And another great lady of painted lady at the end of 1500, beginning of 1600 was Fede Galizia, a very strong woman. She also she married, but she made her husband being her assistant. So a really, really strong woman. And she is the one who started the still life as a genre in itself. She wasn't the only one. There were other painters in Bologna at that time. She was originally from Bologna. And Bologna at the beginning of 1600 was the center of the renovation of art. Most of the artists that then moved to Rome and started the Baroque art, they were basically from Bologna. Lanfranco, Guercino, Domenichino, they were all from that area. And especially the Carracci brothers, Annibale and Agostino, they were basically from Ludovico and Annibale, sorry. They were basically from Bologna. And they brought this kind of naturalism, this freshness into the Roman art, which was already started to fade. And one of those elements was to introduce the still life. Now, this is a few decades in the same decade, or about a decade before the famous Caravaggio still lives, and she made several of them, in which basically there's no other subject than the still life, that the bowl of fruit with this kind of plates called alzate in Italian, no? These serving plates. We would call them cake plates today. I'm not sure how many people use them for fruit anymore. You usually see a cake stand, like a cake stand. It's a fruit stand, and in which she represents the beauty of nature. It's really in a very nice naturalistic way, with these peaches that are very inviting. They're very succulent. They look very inviting. They're almost sexy in the way they're represented, as only a woman can make. They're very, very beautiful in this sense. And she was also a very skilled portrait. So you could see here Fede Galizia, Virgo Pudicissime. So she was 18, and she wrote down she was a virgin, because of course that's one of the first things that you had to say when you meet someone. Hi, hello, I'm Fede, I'm 17, I'm a virgin. That's what you introduce yourself in the Renaissance. And I'll tell you something. Something in the end, on a school trip, there was a moment, one of the staff or the teachers had a senior moment, and she said something about the kids she should never said. Anyway, and so Virgo Pudicissime, so it was a virgin, and she was really how do you say, pudica, chaste. And she was just 18. This is the portrait of Paulo Morigi, who was a scholar, and of course is surrounded by books. He's got the glasses, and you can see she's got the same precision and attention to the portrait that she has for the fruit and for the other details. So it's really extremely detailed portrait, something that the Italian tradition of the late Renaissance was not used to. So it's something that basically it was quite unique. This was just the date here, 1596. And there's of course an influence in this case also from the painter from the painting from Northern Europe, the Flemish masters and so on, which were masters in this extremely detailed subject and figures. One of the best part is in the glasses there is the reflection of the room itself. So you can actually see the details of the room reflected in the glasses, almost an hyper-realistic detail, which I think is really, really clever, really, really interesting. As well as this other portrait. This is a portrait of Zaffini, physician, although it looks like Hamlet. It's just, a doctor with the skull there. And you could see, again, the anatomical detail, the wrinkles, the face. It's all extremely, extremely detailed. She was extremely skilled. She's also one of the first painters, not the first female painter, having represented Judith in Holofernes. So the Jewish hero beheading the general Holofernes with the servants, which became one of the main subjects of the Baroque art. Caravaggio made a beautiful one, but then we'll see Artemisia made that one of her favorite subjects. And in this particular painting, art historians believe that this is her self-portrait. So she was also a good-looking woman. And you can see she's also surrounded by pearls and a very nice dress. Of course, the status of the heroes is here represented also through a gorgeous outfit with this beautiful red curtain. That it was something that also Titian had used before, and also Caravaggio would have been using, that add drama and energy to the entire scene. And then we have a nun. Of course, there must have been a nun who was also a painter. Her name is Orsola Maddalena Caccia. She made mostly this one in particular, I'm not sure. Anyway, these were religious subjects, so there is the same subject in the Sistine Chapel. So they would have been, I'm not sure this particular one for which church was made, but they would have been made for churches or for altars. So these were pieces that were on the altars, basically. So Orsola Caccia, she was a nun, and she painted mostly still lifes as well, mostly flowers. In this case, I have a bird feeding on a peach, and there are other fruits. Now, Orsola, she was really, she paid a lot of attention in representing symbolic elements in her painting. So the bird here picking on a peach is a symbol of Christ, because the peach has the double nature. It's a Buddha in the center, because the seed is a big Buddha, and then there's a Pope outside. So it's been used for centuries as a symbol of double nature of Christ, human and divine. And then, of course, there are the fig trees and other fruits and flowers. They all have a symbolic meaning, of course, and they've been, used in that sense also in other type of allegories. And then by the beginning of the 1600, Artemisia Gentileschi, it's really considered one of the most influential, one of the most skilled Baroque artists, especially in one of the followers of Caravaggio. She was the daughter of Orazio Gentileschi, which was a follower of Caravaggio. And here you can see her self-portrait. She was a good-looking woman, and in this case, again, there's a music in the self-portrait, so she's playing the guitar, like in the musicians' paintings that you can find, for example, in many of Caravaggio's scenes and portraits. She was extremely talented and skilled. Her paintings are some of the best. And she had traveled and worked first in Rome for her father. She actually had a very troublesome life. When she was 17 or 18, her father, that was training her, had another painter, Agostino Tassi, who was a Florentine painter, to come and teach her how to do perspective, because of course different aspects of painting, there were more skilled artists, and he wanted him to teach her. And instead of teaching her, he raped her. Of course, she told the father, and there was a trial that started. The trial lasted three years. It was extremely humiliating for her. She was tortured, because there was a torture. They were basically put a kind of a metal thing on their fingers and trying to squeeze the fingers in until she basically said the truth. Apparently, at that time, torture was like used in every kind of confession, in every kind of part of the trial, even if she was the one who accused the man of being raped. But to be sure, they wanted to torture her because they believed that under torture people told the truth. And of course, she also went under that. Anyway, after 3 years, Tassi was condemned to 3 years, which wasn't too much, but was for that time was too bad. But he only served a few weeks, because the Pope needed Agostino Tassi to do some frescoes in the Palazzo del Quirinale. So basically, Agostino Tassi was granted a pardon, and he didn't really serve time. But by then, Artemisia wasn't in Rome anymore. She had married another painter and moved to Florence. This man was a Florentine man, but he wasn't very good painter, and also he was spending too much money. So a few years later, she had to leave Florence. She decided to leave him and leave Florence, as they were chased by creditors. So it didn't end up. She went back to Rome shortly, and then again she moved to Naples, where she worked there for a few years. Eventually, she went to London, where also she worked. In fact, some of her paintings are also in the National Gallery and other museums in England. And eventually, there was the revolution in the UK, and so she came back to Italy. Eventually, died in Naples. But she was one of the most influential artists of her generation. more influential than most of her male colleagues. Definitely, she was a better painter than her father, and she was also a better painter than most of her colleagues, including the one who raped her. Agostino Tassi, who worked in the many palaces in Rome, is one of the main artists of the early 1600s in Rome, but she was definitely more skilled. This is one of another biblical episodes, Joel and Sisera, where Sisera is being, kills Joel with a nail in the head, and it's cheaper than divorce. I'm kidding. It's just, and it's a scene. It's not very common, but again, it's another biblical episode. It's basically an allegory of retribution. So what happens to evil man? And Artemisia also in the background here. There's the signature. You can see, and this was just done in 1620. So the year she was raped was 1611. This was about 9 years. But I have to say that she represented this scene with a certain satisfaction, I might imagine, here, thinking about what to do to her rapist. And in fact, the man here kind of vaguely looked like Agostino Tassi. He was dark hair, mustache. So most people in the 17th century wore mustache and etc. And then she painted several times Judith and Holofernes. And as again, it's the story of Judith. She was a Jewish lady who dated Holofernes that was about to destroy Israel. So she basically said, tell the guards to let me in your tent overnight and I'll make you happy. And then while he was asleep, she went in there and beheaded him in his sleep. So, and it symbolizes, one of the many female heroes like Esther and many others who basically saved Israel. So it's really an important story. And she's represented there here with the reflection of the candlelight. And then you could see the sword, and the servant is just wrapping up the head to show it that she's done that. There's a beautiful set of colors here. The light is really amazing. She's really one of the best of the followers or imitators of Caravaggio. So it's really, really beautiful scene. The red, the intense red, the intense yellow. She, for some reason, might have thought that the gold was the color that really brightened up and lit up a woman's face and woman's body. In case you could see, this is the Lucrezia, another of this a Roman heroess that also killed herself in trying to escape humiliation and to keep her dignity. The signature is down here on the Artemisia. You can see with the surname of the husband in this case, but you could see that's her signature here, her name down here. Again, let me just clear this. Back. Again, she also represents, of course, the nude, the female nude, but in a way that is not the traditional way, like in the Renaissance, they represent as an object of contemplation or something that is there to be basically enjoyed. In this case, the Venus that has been basically, there's the little love, the little cherub with the fan there. She's just enjoying herself. She's enjoying her freedom. This is a very empowering image of a woman, and only a woman could have painted this. She is really content. She's enjoying her freedom, her beauty. So it's really a woman being proud of who she is, rather than being an object of desire or contemplation by a man, as was traditionally represented by most painters in the Renaissance in the Baroque age, including, for example, Titian in her Venus. Or in this case, we have the Mary Magdalene, that she was supposed to be repenting, but it looks more like someone who's really there, relaxing after hard times. It's like more letting go, just trying to let things wash away from you, rather than repenting for the sin. It's more like she's trying everything bad that's happened to her just wash away. And also, I think this is really intense, and really it shows a very complex and a very deep soul and very deep reflection on that. Of course, there are also other episodes more mundane. This is Betsabea at the bath. Again, you can see the yellow dress down there on the right corner in the bath, and there is also a more mundane scene with she's being dressed up and being taking the jewels, but still. And there is another episode, again, it's a biblical episode of Susan and the two old men who tried to rape her. They blackmail her. They saw her naked bathing, and they said, "Oh, you either lay with us, or we're going to tell that you tried to seduce us." And of course, in another biblical episode of how, in the end, justice, if you have faith in God, justice will triumph. But this is the moment when she's harassed and blackmailed, and you can see she's horrified by what they're whispering there, and the two are just confabulating there. Again, it's represented in a very strong way, I think, in this, considered it's beginning of 1600. Now, a little musical intermezzo. I hope you can hear the music. Tack. This is Handel from the opera Rinaldo. Handel was a German who actually worked and lived in London, and he brought Italian opera in London, which was good for a short while, and then it became a disaster. I think he bankrupted twice or three times because the Brits were not too keen on Italian opera at that time. And there was, in fact, the other operas that he wrote, they were written in English. And we are now moving into the 18th century. Rosalba Carriera, she was a Venetian lady, very strong-willed lady, and she was, of all these artists, she was the one who was the most influential. She brought a new fashion in painting at the beginning of the 18th century, especially in Paris. She even made a portrait of the 10 or 12 years old Louis XV, and so he brought his hairstyle from Venice to Florence. She was the daughter of a lace artisan. The mother was making lace, which was one. Yes, George Handel is buried in Westminster, of course. Although during all his life in London, they made fun of his accent because he had a very heavy German accent. So they might send it back to Germany now with Brexit, who knows? So dig him up, ship it down.
No, but they respected him and paid him well at the end.
Yes, of course. So, and hopefully he became a British citizen as well. So this is the self-portrait of Rosalba, and so she was a Venetian, and she basically, her mother first taught her to do in the lace. Now the lace in Venice, they do now in the island of Burano, the one with all the colorful houses. It's a tradition that mothers to daughters pass on. Now, there was a school teaching that till the 1970s. Now it's closed, it's a museum, so probably it's one of the dying tradition. Anyway, it's a very different technique, and you need to do the design yourself. So it is a lot of preparation. So that's how she got into design. And at that time, at the beginning of the 18th century, there was the snuff tobacco. So all the gentlemen, they had these snuffing boxes where they basically snuffed and of course they were made of ivory or other precious materials, and they usually had portraits or images painted. So that's how she started her career in making this kind of trade. She then became a very important painter. So she traveled, she went to Paris, she became a member of the Academy of St. Luc, the Academy of Painting, which was not a place where they taught. It was more like a kind of association of celebrated artists. And in this case, she represented herself without embellishing herself. She had she wasn't particularly attractive woman. She had quite a big face, but then she always represents herself the way she looks. She doesn't try to embellish herself, which I think it really does her well, because she was very proud of her image, which I think this is also very interesting. This is also her dress up as the Allegory winter. Of course, in Venice, they had costumes for every season. They loved being, dressed up in different costumes. In this case, she represented herself. She started to use the pastels and also chalk in paintings. So she showed a new technique, how chalk and pastel colors could be used, widening the type of effects and colors that could be used. So really, she brought a lot of innovation into the technique of Baroque art. She's not Today, the art historians don't value her as much as she should, mostly because, of course, she was a Rococo artist. So it's compared to the more dramatic 19th century art, it was considered something more, frivolous, or something that served, the high class of the ruling class of the 18th century, rather than being something with a meaning. Of course, this is a lady with a mask. You can see how beautiful is the trait, the colors, the softness of his. There's really it's really pleasant to look at. That's what she really was able to achieve, a type of coloring that we have to wait probably, I don't know, painters like Rousseau, some other painters of the 19th century to appreciate that kind of quality of really pleasant to look at. Anyway, the French artists really learn a lot from a style. This is a portrait of a lady with a monkey. Of course, she was portraiting these dames and ladies and lords. So basically, she wasn't a classical. This is herself with as a painter laureate, with this kind of vrats on the side of her head. And then at the end of the century, a very important painter. She was born in Austria, in Switzerland, and Angelica Kaufman. It's one of the most important painters of the Grand Tour age, by the second half of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. She basically she soon traveled south, so she spent most of her early years in Rome, where she completed her training, and then she moved down to Naples, where she also became very appreciated by the King of Naples, making several portraits of the members of the family of the King of Naples, and also of the people of the court at that time, which was an international court. There was also lots of British and French nobles, and you can see this is a self-portrait. Again, she is there with the tools of her art, and then down here she is again represented. In this case, she has a kind of a pencil and a sketchbook, because of course that was the base, the drawing. Now we are in a period that goes towards the classicism, so she was seen in her age as the equivalent, more or less, of Antonio Canova. So that kind of ideal beauty, that kind of perfection and idealized beauty that came from the ancient Greek and Romans, she was trying to recreate that. For this reason, especially in the 19th century, she was seen as a very cold artist. At the same time, she was looking at Raphael as a master. You can see that this kind of paintings, it looks a lot like Raphael masterpieces, with that kind of bright colors, that kind of perfections, that kind of positioning of the figures. This is another self-portraits. You can see female artists made a lot of self-portraits, and that is basically her. She's in the center. There are two large pillars, so the symbol of the classical world, and mountains on the right, so the natural environments that was also rediscovered in the 18th century. And she's between music on the left and poetry and painting on the right, which can be recognized by their own tool. In this case, the music has the belt that she had in the previous painting. Again, is a symbolic belt. And this is Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi, a Roman lady which fostered the career of her children. The Gracchi brothers became one of the most important reformers of the Roman Republic. They were the one who stated that the state was paying for the weapons and the outfits of the soldiers, and not the private landowners, and not the private members of the Roman Republic had to pay for the military expenses. So they created the condition, the base for a larger democratic participation to the government of Rome. So they're seen as a symbol of virtue. And you could see again the Roman architecture, the pillars, they have, like we saw in Palladio, they have a moral meaning. Those pillars, they represent the solidity, the moral solidity of the classical world. And this is the royal family of Naples. Of course, they had plenty of children, because that's all they did. So the King of Naples, like the King of Spain and the Bourbon in general, they received no education. They only spent time playing music, enjoying art, doing their chase and hones, and their participating to dinners and having a lot of fun. They were not involved in politics, and the king and the queen only had to make children, as many as they could. So that was the only thing they were doing. So really, it wasn't royal life doesn't look that great. I mean, and it doesn't take, you know, over the history, if you see how the royals live, you know, they weren't really doing much else than that. Anyway, Angelica Kaufman made something between 500 and 600 paintings in her career. So she was extremely productive. But as I said, many art historians, they saw her to be too intellectual and cold. She also met in Rome Goethe, Wolfgang Goethe, and Goethe was 40 something when he came to Rome. He had never been with a woman before. He grew up in a very, you know, Lutheran environment, moral, religion, study, philosophy, not much fun. So when he came to Rome, he had the plus. Of course, he fell in love, but not with Angelica. So it didn't work between them. So she was really bitter because of that. Anyway, she traveled. She went to Vienna. She was one of the most important figures of her time. Although towards the end of the 18th century, after the French Revolution, the world changed a lot. So most of the context and the figures that she was connected to basically kind of faded. In this case, this is the Christ and the Adultera, and the can't remember the English name. Anyway, it's one of the episodes of the New Testament, and you can see that the figures are basically similar to what we saw in the kind of Raphael style, but they were seen as cold and distant even when they were made, although they were beautiful. And now we are now fully in the 18th century. Let's have a bit of not with this one. Let's get out. I'll play. We have a French now. We swap to France. Elisabeth Vigée Lebrun, and Lebrun. We have a bit of music, which is here, the flower duet. These are Elina Garanca and Anna Netrebko, the two great sopranos, with the Leo Delibes Lakme, the flower duet. Now, and so we enter into this is the end of the 19th century, but more or less it's the kind of the passage of an age. So Lebrun is not to be confused with the 17th century French painter, who was a man, and one of the great masters of French art. And she was the favorite artist of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. So basically, she made several portraits of the Queen. She became she was part of the Academy of France. She was a highly celebrated lady, but she was considered somehow frivolous in the sense that she represented the life of the rich and of the wealthy of the towards the end of the 18th century. A society that was about to fade and being actually destroyed with the revolution. She fled Paris in the fall of 1789, just before, you know, the period of the terror, and then eventually the king and queen were beheaded. So it wasn't a great time. She ended up traveling down south, went to Italy. She spent part of her life in Naples, and then in 1802, she managed to get, sign off the list of the proscription. There were lists of people that were, to be arrested and executed because they were part of the ancien regime of the connected with the French monarchy. And anyway, she managed to return to France, and then she went back to France as nothing has happened. She also wrote a book of her memories called Souvenirs, and you would expect from an intellectual, an artist, to have a lot of, intellectual consideration. No, it's all about the parties that she went to, the society, the other ladies. So in this sense, it's really, really kind of a good portrait of an age in which these people had no other worries than enjoying life, making beautiful things, enjoying beautiful things, spending the money. And this is the entire world that came down with the French Revolution. This is a self-portrait, again, that represent here as a beautiful lady with also, in also kind of a sexy way, with the palette and the colors. This is one of the portraits that she made of Queen Antoinette, which she holds a flower, and of course the flower is as beautiful as the queen herself. She's got all this hair done up, and the feathers and the laces, with this gorgeous backdrop as well. So this is very, very beautiful, very elegant. This is another self-portrait. This is very beautiful because it's so direct. She had a very fresh approach to the portraits. She was a pupil of, or she belonged to the school of Jacques-Louis David, the grand, French painter of the large, celebrating art. This is the beginning of the 19th century was seen as, academic art. So it was the art of the academy that the Impressionists then later on started to fight against. But anyway, it was the prime of the age. In fact, this painting, for example, has the allegory. This was made around 1780, and it's the allegory of peace, welcoming wealth and abundance. Of course, peace as the in her hand, right hand, she has the olive branch, and then of course abundance, she's got flowers, there's wheat, because of course food and bread, every sort of fruit, and then of course she's half naked because it's abundance, so there's always everything that is good, and of course she has got one breast now because of feeding. When she had to escape from France, she ended up in Naples. This is the portrait of Francesco Brimo, Francis I, the son of the King of Naples, Ferdinand IV, Ferdinand I. So this was made at the beginning of 1800s, and the King of Naples also went in exile, but at the time they were still in Naples. You could see the Vesuvius at the end. Now, Naples at the time was one of the largest cities in Europe, who had more than 200,000 inhabitants. Only Paris was as big in Europe at the time, and had a very sophisticated, rich, and wealthy ruling class, as well as a vast class of poor people, which are really one of the poorest poors that you can find in the world at that time. And there was a city of contrast. Anyway, there were a lot of travelers. It was one of the favorite places to go during the Grand Tour age. And of course, there were lots of Britons. One of the most prominent Britons at that time in Naples was Lord William Hamilton, which was the very first volcanologist in history. He studied the Vesuvius and the eruption of the Vesuvius, and was the first one to write a book about volcanoes. And he was married to a dancer, which cheated on him all the time, but she was a good-looking woman, so I guess they had a deal out of it. He was older than her, I think much older. And this is Lady Emma Hamilton, represented as a kind of man, kind of a classical dancer, with these grapes in the head and the vines in the head, the Vesuvius in the background, the little drum, like a bit like a classical dancer. And this is again a portrait made by Lebrun during the Neapolitan period, towards between the last decade of the 1700s, basically. One on the other side, so Lebrun represented the artist that was protected and somehow helped by the nobles, and especially by the queen. On the other side, there is a contemporary, Adelaide Labille Gouillard. She was basically a self-made woman. She had no background, she had no family behind her, but she, through her skill and hard work, she managed not only to become one of the most important painters at the time in Paris, but also to start a school. In fact, in this portrait, she is represent herself sitting in the center painting with behind her two of her pupils. Both of them became acclaimed painters as well. And so it's basically an all-female scene saying, you know, we can do this. And also without, you know, having the protection of the lords, of the ladies, she actually managed to get into the academy as well and to get into a career in a way that she didn't have to thank a special relationship like Lebrun had with the King Marie Antoinette. And this is one of the pupils made this portrait of the master in their studio, making a portrait of a man. And I think, you see, there are two female painters here sitting, and so they are the center of the painting. The action is on them, while the men are all around looking. So this is actually shows that at the end of the 18th century, women had quite more emancipated that they were, for example, in the 19th century. In fact, the French Revolution somehow took off some, I mean, to give freedom, civil freedom to everyone, they took some of the freedoms that at least in the ruling classes women had, because they were intellectual women, they had a certain degree of freedom, and there were a number of other things. In fact, for example, in the civil law that was created after the French Revolution, basically women were subjected to their husbands, and so it was actually kind of a setback in Europe, the French Revolution, and again the civil code that was then the one on which most of Western and Southern Europe, most of the countries that were subjected to the French Empire basically were based on. And then we are getting slowly towards the 19th century. Marigold Benoit, she was a very she really shocked the audience in Paris in 1800 by representing a black woman. Now, France was one of the first countries in the world to abolish slavery in 1794. So it was already been 6 years since slavery was abolished. Now, in Europe, most slaves were female, about 90% were ladies, most of them domestics, both from Turkey and Central Asia, and from Africa. So it was very different that, for example, the slavery in Northern or in Southern America, where it was more working force in the countryside. In Europe, there weren't really working slaves. It was very, very rare, very, very unusual to find working slaves. For example, the King of Naples had a team of 300, 400 slaves to build the royal palace of Caserta in the 1700s, but half of them escaped. The other half felt sick, so it wasn't very efficient as a system. And while domestics were until certain parts of Italy and certain parts of Europe, until as late as 1850, there were still slaves. Officially, Italy, the Italian states abolished slavery only in 1839, 1838, one of the last. In Naples, there were still slaves, probably as late as 1850. Anyway, as we said, many of the slaves were also bonded slaves, and then they were freed and work as domestics in the house. Anyway, this was this painting was shown in 1800, just the year 1800, and it really shocked the people. At that time, there was this idea that black skin could not be represented on a painting, not for a racial reason, just for a technical reason. While she proved that there's this beautiful bronze and gold color of the reflection of the skin, and this very beautiful woman looking at us, with her breasts out. It's a symbol. It's like a black Venus. It's really a symbol of beauty and a symbol of power. I really love this painting because the contrast with the cream background and the turban and the vest, and then the beautiful rendering of the skin and the traits. Consider that, of course, it's soon after the French Revolution. At that time, of course, traditionally, the Catholic countries didn't have, slavery was not based on racial issues, at least in the Catholic countries. It was more something that, was more of the Protestant countries, and also in England, there were more racial-based issues rather than in the Catholic countries for a number of reasons. Anyway, it was still something that really shocked the contemporaries. If you consider then a painter with the portraiting a black woman I mean, there have been in the Renaissance also, for example, black gondoliers in Venetian paintings, or other black people in the Renaissance art, but weren't very common, and usually were there put as servant. In this case, she's not a servant. She's not there on the side, on the background. She is the subject of the painter. And then Impressionism. Berthe Morisot was one of the most important. There were several female impressionists, but she was probably the most important, also because she was a friend of Edouard Manet, and she married Edouard Manet's brother. So basically, they had a long relationship, also family relation, oral life. She was something in between Manet style and the early Impressionists, and she was also looking at Renoir and Degas as a sort of inspiration. She's somehow in between them. Anyway, the Impressionists started to, as opposite to the academic tradition of French art that celebrated whether mythology or religion or the values of the conqueror, whether Napoleon or the politicians, they only celebrated the common life, the daily life, as a kind of a revolutionary, as a sort of form of protest. They concentrated more on the artist and the relationship to society, and the artist to society. That's why the first thing that they did, they wanted to show that this was a painting. So you have to see the brush strokes, you have to see the fact that this is actually made by paint, and that's why you can actually see every single brush stroke. This is a portrait of Morisot made by Manet, and of course this is a painting by Berthe Morisot. She represented mainly women, and of course their family life, their intimate life, reading, and of course most of their family aspects. So in that case, she again, as opposite to the celebration of wars, of mythology, of political values, they celebrated the intimacy of the private life, and also the rediscovery of the outdoors, something that most Manet did first, and then Monet with the gardens of Givenchy, and then the southern France. So they really went back out in plein air, in the open space, and refine in touch with the real nature, and they represent the relationship between the painter and the art and the nature, rather than a kind of a fake image of the reality, like the painters of the more classicist style. And very often there are ladies out in reading, or in this case a man at the mirror, which reminds a lot of Degas dancers and Degas figures. And they with Manet, she had Manet's brother. She had one child, Julie, a girl, and she's represented in many paintings, not by her, but also by other impressionists, because of course they're all friends. Imagine it was a group of people that spent together a lot of time. They were just colleagues, they were also spending time together as friends. And so there are several portraits. She appears in several portraits by also other impressionists. This is by the mother, so it represented the daughter on the left with the nanny, of course, because they were, of course, middle classes, so they had the money. And down here we get to the last one, which of course, by the end of the 19th century, especially in the 20th century, there are many female artists, probably even too many, some not even that good. But usually when you think of 20th century artists that above all represent empowering and freedom and representation of really themes that are deeply female themes, you would think of Frida Kahlo. Personally, I'm not a big fan of pop art, and in general I don't appreciate that kind of art for a number of reasons. This is my personal idea. Personally, I think that type of art, it's closer to advertisement, to marketing, to media than it is to art. While Georgia O'Keeffe, abstract expressionism, American modernism, they are much closer to Miguel Angelo and to Raphael than, for example, pop art or Frida Kahlo, that kind of art, figurative art, let's say, in general. And Keeffe, she had also quite a troubled life. She was originally from Chicago. She then moved to New York, that by the 1940s became the center of international art. And I think this picture was taken by Stieglitz, which was an art merchant, and he was married to another woman, but she started dating him as well, and eventually they moved in together. He later divorced, and they started basically to become a couple. But he was a serial cheater, which I think if you start a relation with a man that is already with someone else, that maybe might give out the fact that he was not going to be the most faithful man. So that's anyway, she suffered a lot because of that. They lived kind of separate life for a while. Eventually she moved out. She had a property in New Mexico, and then eventually he had a stroke while she was being treated for depression. So basically he died, and again there was the mourning. She really suffered mentally because she had an extremely long life. She was nearly 100 years old when she died. Eventually she spent most of her time in the desert, and really the desert, she was able to make artworks dialogue with the idea, the sense of extreme and frontier that the desert brings. You're just there out in a very harsh environment with the elements, the blue sky, the colors that get very intense there, the red rocks, and so she basically recreated this kind of feel and elements of the extreme of the nature that reflects the stream of the soul. She must have suffered a lot for during her life, and so that kind of sensation, the depression, she had mental issues as well. She was treated actually for mental issues. So basically, that kind of her inside feelings were represented also. But she also kept it very visually, very beautiful. And that's why I do like this kind of art a lot, because she is doing the same things that in the 1500s Miguel Angelo and Titian were doing. They were working with colors, with shapes, with feelings, and try to balance, to recreate their atmosphere, something that personally I don't find in much of pop art, because there's too much references to the common word. I find it, I mean, no offense if there's people who are fan of that kind of art, but I find it more vulgar. This is a lot more sophisticated, it's a lot more intimate. And this, of course, is the ram with the flower. The flower is also an allegory of female, and in some way she's quintessentially a female artist, to a point that her vision, especially the large colorful ones, she was able to transform these flowers into skies, into waves, and again in a sort of basically colorful female genitalia. You could see something here. I'll show you another one. I hope I'm in no offense to that, but it's really a beautiful masterpiece that I think of all these hundreds of years of female artists, Georgia O'Keeffe really represent the points where then she was able to bring art to a complete different level and to make a fully 100% female art, an art that only a woman can make, and probably only women can fully and deeply appreciate as part of themselves. And these beautiful, colorful images, and this flower that is also basically a sort of idealized, colorful vagina, which is basically a kind of homage to the women. And with this last painting by Georgia O'Keeffe, I hope you enjoyed this
Tonight, so